Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Henny Saif, and this afternoon on Q News, we take an in-depth look at Egypt's strong condemnation of Israel's strikes on Syria and the escalating tensions in Suwayda province. As Israel vows more strikes to protect the Druze community, regional stability hangs in the balance. We examine the diplomatic, military and humanitarian fallout and what it all means for the region's future. Stay tuned for our special coverage here on Q News. A massive explosion has rocked Damascus following an Israeli airstrike targeting the Syrian General Staff building. That comes as intense security measures were deployed around the site after a direct hit. Reports indicate casualties resulted from the strike, with security sources confirming deaths and injuries in the attack on Syria's Ministry of Defense. Israeli media further claimed that the Israeli military also targeted the Syrian presidential palace in Damascus, marking a significant escalation in strikes against key Syrian government facilities. Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's repeated attacks on Lebanese and Syrian territories, viewing them as blatant violations of their sovereignty, international law and UN resolutions. In a statement by the Foreign Ministry, Cairo emphasized the critical importance of respecting both nations' sovereignty and territorial integrity, rejecting any interference in their internal affairs. That comes as these ongoing Israeli violations exacerbate regional tensions, undermining stability amidst crucial Egyptian-backed international de-escalation efforts. The Syrian presidency has strongly condemned recent violations in Suwayda province, labeling them as criminal and unlawful acts unacceptable under any circumstances. The presidency is closely monitoring these distressing incidents, emphasizing their complete contradiction to Syrian state principles. Investigations are underway, promising to hold accountable all individuals or illegal groups involved, with strict legal penalties. Ensuring national security and stability remains a top priority, with justice as the guiding principle. The state reaffirms its commitment to protecting Suwayda's residents and preventing any threats to their safety or peace. The Syrian Arab news agency has reported that the Israeli Air Force launched an attack on Damascus, targeting a Ministry of Defense building. This strike coincides with ongoing clashes between Druze and Bedouin tribes in Suwayda province. An Israeli military spokesman stated the target was the gateway to the Syrian General Staff headquarters. Israel continues monitoring southern Syria and remains ready for various scenarios. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz vowed to persistently strike Syrian government forces until they withdraw from Suwayda, pledging to protect the Druze and enforce disarmament policies. The Syrian Ministry of Defense has announced that outlawed groups attacked army and internal security forces in Suwayda despite a ceasefire agreement with local leaders. That came as renewed clashes erupted, accompanied by heavy artillery and mortar shelling on the city and nearby villages. The ministry affirmed the army's right to respond while adhering to engagement rules to protect civilians and ensure their safe return. Residents were urged to stay indoors and report remaining armed groups. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Katz vowed continued strikes until Syrian forces withdraw from Suwayda. For further analysis, we're joined from Damascus by the International Studies Professor at Sun Yat-sen University, Professor Sheher Sheher. Welcome to Q News, Professor Sheher. How do Israel's repeated strikes on Syria and Lebanon impact broader regional stability, especially with Egypt now openly condemning these actions?
Hello everyone. Good evening. Actually, what is happening is very dangerous. What's happening is really dangerous. It's a dangerous escalation in Syria. They are targeting different places in Syria. This escalation is not in anyone's favor. This means that the Syrian government is in a huge war. This is a problem. They won't be able to do what they want to because of the Israeli strikes, and it sends negative messages to the north. This means that the government that this will, and in my opinion, these strikes aren't in the Jews' favor because this will go down in history as Israel intervening to protect the Jews, which will leave negative. This is how things are going. Things are escalating quickly. The statements say that the government is continuing its strikes.
Dr. Sheher, what are the potential risks for the further escalation between Israel and Syria, particularly in Suwayda, given the involvement of the local Druze groups?
The escalation will come from the Druze in Majd al-Shams, the occupied region. The Jews came from Israel to this. Because of this, we will see that other tribes, they will intervene in the east, and maybe from other actors from Jordan. We will see other tribes in this region, and this will have the region enter a war, and everyone will say, where's the country? This is the main issue. When a problem happens, people start saying, where is the country? And the country is responsible for this. And when the country intervenes, they say, we won't be intervening because this country is called a terrorist. And Syria is now in a difficult situation because of everything that's happening from the military and how they dealt with people in the Suwayda, and they are saying we will be acting forcefully with these things, and this gives actually a positive implication of Syria, and further escalation in especially in Damascus and Samhaya. They will maybe witness some things because of what's happening in Syria.
How significant is Egypt's strong condemnation in terms of influencing diplomatic or military responses from other Arab states or the international community as a whole?
Egypt's role is very important. Egypt is one of the main pillars in the region, and maybe the most place that we need to understand the reasons. The intervention of some countries, maybe it doesn't send the same messages. Like some Arab countries, they don't send the same message. They don't make them feel safe. But Egypt's intervention is very important and is important to the Syrian people, and I think it is acceptable to everyone. And there's a very dangerous thing going on now.
Hmm. So, apart from the condemnations, what role could regional and international actors play in de-escalating tensions in Sueda and preventing wider conflict?
Now, the road between Damascus and Suida is not available. So I think that everyone is requested to intervene because things are escalating quickly. So I mean, the international community, the route needs to be opened again between uh, East Frat and Suida. It is a very important road, and it needs to be open because it will provide the aid.
Hmm. Dr. Asher, Israel has stated its policy of continuing going on with the strikes against the Syrian forces. How do you think this will affect the internal dynamics between the Syrian government troops and the local Druze factions?
Actually, the country taking such a step, I thought that there would be better organization or like organization between the US side or the Israeli sides because such a step will have grave consequences.
Hmm. Well, speaking of the consequences, what are the humanitarian implications and consequences for the civilians in Suwayda province and southern Syria? Because clashes and Israeli airstrikes are intensifying.
Yeah, Syria doesn't have any arms. Actually, we are talking about hundreds of dead and injured people in the region. They, there is no control in this war. It is not an organized war. It is just happening. It is happening between what makes the Syrian people, and there is a division in what's happening. There is by those that welcomed the Syrian military, and it supports the intervention of the Syrian military. And there are others that said they have reached an agreement with the Syrian government. And
Mhm. That was Professor Sheher El-Sheher from Damascus, the International Studies Professor at SUNY Yat-sen University. Dr. Sheher, thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. Now, the spiritual leader of Israel's Druze community, Muwaffaq Tarif, has demanded striking the Syrian regime to force its withdrawal from Suwayda, calling the conflict existential. He affirmed the commitment of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz to act. And meanwhile, Syria's Druze spiritual leadership urged regional and international intervention to calm Suwayda. Katz vowed continued Israeli strikes on Syrian forces until they retreat, warning of escalated responses if ignored. Recent clashes reignited between Syrian government troops and local Druze fighters shortly after a ceasefire announcement. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has stated that Israel is actively working to eliminate threats against its security in southern Syria. He accused the Syrian regime of hostile actions targeting minorities and emphasized Israel's firm stance against any harm to the Druze community in Syria. He underscored the desire to maintain the current status quo along the Syrian border and affirmed Israel's commitment to defending the Druze to bolster its own national security. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has declared that warning messages to Damascus have ended and harsh strikes will now be executed. Katz reaffirmed the military's commitment to operate forcefully in Suwayda province in Syria. The Israeli Defense Minister vowed to destroy all forces that attack the Druze community until they fully withdraw. Israel's stance signals a significant escalation in its military campaign aimed at securing Druze safety and pressuring Syrian government forces to retreat from the region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that the Israeli army and air force are actively working to dismantle the Syrian regime. He urged Israeli Druze citizens to refrain from crossing the border into Syria, emphasizing the importance of maintaining national security and preventing escalations. This stance highlights Israel's commitment to intensifying military efforts against Syria while safeguarding its own population from involvement in the conflict. For more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the writer and journalist Mr. Abdurrahman Rabboua. Welcome to Q News. What are the potential risks and consequences of Israel openly committing to forceful strikes against Syrian forces in Suwayda?
Yes, there is forceful actions that started yesterday from Israel, and today they hit some governmental buildings in Damascus under Khan, and these are warning messages from Israel asking the Israeli government to withdraw its military from the places that they entered into 2 days ago to solve the problems and ensure stability there and resolve the ongoing war there. And so the Bedouin there, this escalation is very dangerous. It also came coinciding with some things that happened from Islamic Tunisian tribes in Syria. And Israel is asking the government in Damascus to withdraw its forces and leave the region empty with no army.
How might the opposing stances of Israel's Druze spiritual leadership and Syria's Druze leaders impact the unity and safety of the Druze communities on both sides?
There is no doubt that any intervention in the benefit of any of the Syrian actors, it is beneficial to Syria, and the Israeli intervention, especially, and the intervention of Syrians. However, opposing to the new government is, they are getting the help of outer actors, especially from Israel. Is not a friend to Syria; it is a direct enemy to Syria, and I don't think that it is in the favor of any Syrian actor to request an Israeli intervention. So this is very clear that this is not national. It is happening to the enemies of the Syrian people, and the Syrian people will not stay still. And we see now more, they are now more revolved around the Syrian government uh, especially it is supposed to be neutral in wars.
Mr. Abwa, could Israel's military escalation in Suez provoke broader regional involvement or retaliation from other actors such as Iran or Hezbollah?
I don't think there is a regional intervention that will happen except for some political interventions. We saw a very strict uh, act from Egypt and Turkey. They refuse any intervention in Syria from Israel or from any other thing. And we also saw some statements from other countries like in Europe and some other Arab countries in Qatar, Emirates, Kuwait, and Jordan. All these political statements are welcome in Syria, and I don't think that the other actors like Iran or Hezbollah can intervene because initially these actors are opponents to the Syrian government, and it is not in their favor to intervene.
Mm-hmm. Well, how does Israel's declared goal of dismantling the Syrian regime, as stated by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, align with its long-term security strategy along the northern border?
Israel has been aiming for a very long time for Syria to stay a very weak and fragile country, and so we saw what happened in last December when it bombed the Syrian military because they were afraid of the new government, and so it doesn't want Syria to be strong or to heal, and it wants for Syria to stay fragile, to stay weak, and to stay torn. This is in their favor to, to expand their occupation in the region, and it is working with all the supporting sides either in America or in Europe. And unfortunately, they have found, like, they said earlier today that they want an Israeli intervention, and so this is very unnational, and it is in the favor of Israel and not in Syria's favor.
You've mentioned before that you expect international parties and the international community to intervene. So what sort of diplomatic or mediation avenues do you think would exist to prevent further clashes and protect civilians in Suez? And who could realistically lead such efforts?
Currently, I think that Egypt and Turkey can play a diplomatic and political role that is very important. They are now very close to Syria, and any country that is close to Syria, and they can mediate. So maybe people in Egypt and others in Turkey, they can play an important role to stop these forceful actions. And also the Syrian government is asked to act wisely and not drag the country to more wars and more disputes. They can take more wars and more occupation, especially from the external disputes or even from others that are internal. So everyone in Syria now wants peace, and there are millions of Syrians that want to go back to Syria. And what's happening now, and these actions and these strikes, unwise actions from everyone involved, this is not in Syria's favor. This is not in the favor of these millions of Syrians that want to go back to Syria. They want to go back to their country, and the country needs them to, so that they can rebuild it and to bring back balance in the country.
Over the past few days, we've seen a lot of developments taking place on the political Israeli spectrum. Now, how might Israel's actions influence the domestic politics, especially regarding its relationship with its own Druze minority and broader public opinion?
Yes, what's happening in Syria is an extension of what's happening in Israel. There is a huge part of the Israel occupation military in Gaza. Netanyahu and the Israeli occupation military, they depend heavily on the Jews in Israel to keep Gaza in line, and they want to be up with this tribe that are in full cooperation with them. Israel wants its they have some relations with Druze in Syria, and wants to get the Jews on their side, and they want to widen and broaden Israel, even if it means harm to Syria. And they have contacted them for Israel to be more wide and more broad, and for their satisfaction, so this has now some sheikhs and some Islamic tribes in Syria have asked some help from those people, and what we see now is a literal interpretation of the bilateral relations between the Jews in Syria, some Jews in Syria and some Jews in Israel, the ones that are involved in the Israeli project aiming to expand Israel.
Then how do you expect the situation domestically in Syria would evolve? How might the evolving dynamics between the Syrian government forces and the Druze fighters in Suwayda affect the broader security landscape in southern Syria and neighboring regions as well?
What's happening is still very dangerous, and everyone is worried. Everyone is worried because of what's happening, and we hope from the Syrian government first to aim for peace and to stop the escalation and allow political intervention, and allow, especially in Egypt, Turkey and Jordan, and be wise and act in a wise and a political way. And I think that the Arab aid to Syria, maybe they will help to lessen what's happening and have things go back to how they were, and start negotiations, international negotiations, as a single method to achieve peace in Syria and stop Israel from doing this and from achieving what they want in Syria and in other countries.
Mr. Abdulrahman Raboua from Cairo, the writer and journalist, thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. As tensions continue to rise, the region watches closely for what comes next. We'll keep following these developments and bring you all the latest updates here on Q News. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Q News AGY to stay informed. Thank you for joining us.